في هذه الجلسة سيتداول المتحاورون أشكال التبادل الثقافي المتجسدة في البيناليات ودورها في التغيير الاجتماعي وبناء المجتمعات. تشارك فيها القيمة الفنية أوته ميتا باور وآية البكري الرئيس التنفيذي لبينالي الدرعية ومديرة بينالي برلين الفن المعاصر غابي هورن. يدير الحوار دكتور رافال المشرف العام لبينالي فاونديشنز. Enjoy.
So yes, hello, thank you for coming. I know it's a marathon and we really appreciate you being here, and thank you for inviting us to speak here today, and also selecting this really challenging topic for us. So we're gonna do our best. I would like to just begin by creating some frame for discussion. Then I'll invite our distinguished speakers to just make a short comment on that. And then I would like to open to the floor as early as possible, because we're gonna be talking about engagement, we're gonna be talking about community, so I want everyone to be involved in this discussion. So we're talking about biennials as drivers for social change, and I think there are sort of three interconnected drivers here, three layers that we can identify. The first one would be artistic practice, the second one would be curatorial strategy, and finally, the third one would be the institutional commitment towards the local community. So let's start with the artistic practice. Since the 90s, as some of you may know, you've heard terms such as social turn or educational turn. It's actually the artists that started embracing the social rather than only aesthetic concerns, and used the sociality itself as a medium in what has been described as the social turn. And the use of that term and understanding, it's still very flexible. It started with Nicolas Bourriaud, who came with this term relational aesthetic to try to describe. So the critics have been, since the beginning, kind of struggling how to describe those new type of practices. Claire Bishop is another person that it's really good to read to kind of understand and get a little bit more of insight into this type of practices. But what is relevant for us is that those artists really are seeking to critically engage with the social matters. And they're no longer content just with the fact that their work represents social reality. They want to change it. They want to influence it. So it's really quite new and exciting approach. And the consequence is that their activities as an artist started blurring many boundaries. So a lot of these projects, are about the object making, but also performance, political activism, and community work. Some of them can be even a piece of investigative journalism. So we see all sorts of works that are involved, also the participatory work as well. But the objective is always to better the society in some way. Sometimes it's about raising awareness about the pressing issues. Sometimes it's about tangibly improving the lives of people, of communities, and artists tend to work with, often with parts of society, communities that are somehow disfranchised, to give them the voice and to give them the visibility. And I'm thinking about artists such as Tanya Bruguera, Jeremy Deller, Susan Lacey, Pavel Althammer, Janne van Hesvik, just to name those who actually did a lot of work in the context of biennials. I think their work is very representative of that shift. But that interest that they share, we can find artists pretty much everywhere we go today. There are actually now several master degrees in different art schools around the world that offer MA in social practice. So I think once we have that entering academia, this is almost like we cannot describe it as a new practice anymore. It actually becomes established practice. So I think that this is the first level, that we have artists who really started the whole discussion here. The second level is the curators, and curators very promptly actually responded to that new paradigm shift that we've seen that started with the artist. And biennials in particular, that are always service shows, they always try to really keep their fingers on the pulse. They really address and always try to somehow capture the zeitgeist, capture the moment, but also capture the spirit of the place. So they're actually really well fitted to accommodate this sort of new practice that happens. And I would say that, that a lot of biennials picked it up probably a little bit earlier that museums and commercial galleries, some of commercial galleries still struggle to pick up this type of practice. But I would like to just maybe, if we can advance, show you just few examples that maybe you've seen before, but maybe you haven't realized that they actually been produced by biennials. So this is a famous work by Francis Alice called When the Faith Moves the Mountain, that actually been produced in 2002 for the Lima Biennial, where the artist persuaded 500 people to move a sand dune, one shovel at a time. This work has been, of course, praised for its allegoric dimension, but nevertheless, it was also there to show us and remind us that it is not always the faith, it's also the workers and their hands that move the mountains. Another really good example, early example of this practice being shown in biennials is during Manifesta 5, which was held in San Sebastian in Spain. Jeremy Deller, who's a British artist, worked with all sorts of local associations. He did a survey, he went to the city and found out and invited them to participate in a parade at the opening day of the Biennale. And they all walked on the streets. Here you can see that this is a tango club that they had. So you had tango dancers, but there were all sorts of associations that he gave visibility to. And on a curatorial level, as I started talking about that, there is this response, maybe not first from biennials, but notably there was a show in the United States called Culture in Action, that there was another one called Projet Unité in France, and there was a 93 edition of Sonsbeek, which is this irregular biennial happening in the Netherlands. And I would say that, from my research, that these are the first 3 shows that really address this new type of practice and introduce curatorial strategies and how to deal with that. There were also quite really interesting developments in biennials, quite extreme, where curators almost abandoned the medium exhibition. They wanted to go so far into the social. So perhaps the most notorious of them that I could find was the Berlin Biennial, actually, by Niemojewski, where he really turned the exhibition into a space for political interventionism. Then there was a manifesta in Nicosia in Cyprus. Nicosia is a city that is still divided between 2 countries. And the curators decided that the best thing, that the most important thing to do is open an art school. There is no art school, there is no art education. We're gonna put all the resources in opening the art school. The project actually never happened, but had really good continuation. So it was sort of like a failure that turned to be success in the end, because a lot of projects grew out of it. And closer to home, Riwaq Biennale, that is headquartered in Ramallah in Palestine, really interesting initiative. They also work with very difficult infrastructure, and this is where the curator decided to just invite artists from around the world to come and meet the local artists. They really created like an experience for them, studio visits, but also just experience how it is to live in Ramallah today, what it means, that everyday reality. There was also a symposium, but this is just to point out to the fact that often curators also want to engage. So it's not always just coming from the artist project, but curators also follow up. And finally, but very importantly, the first aspect of our discussion, which is about the institutional commitment of biennales as organizations to their local communities. And many biennials around the world do a really good job of education and with engaging and developing their audiences. I can quote here Liverpool Biennial, of course Berlin Biennale, Guangzhou, Mercosur, Kochi. They all have very sophisticated public programs and educating activities that they've developed over consecutive editions over many years. I think what is really special about the Diriyah Biennale Foundation is that education, and I'm going to ask Aya to elaborate on that, really has been embedded in this project from the start. I actually remember my first meeting with Aya 2 years ago, and the first thing she said, this is about education. This is our problem, which is that there is no infrastructure, there is no art in curriculum. This is what this biennial going to be about, and that really stuck with me. And so I think it's really probably, I would say, first in the world, in the history of Biennales, a Biennale that from day one has been designed with education and with community engagement at heart. So I'm just going to ask our speakers now to refer, you can select, pick one of those 3 drivers or all of them or whatever you think most relevant. So I pass the microphone. Oh, I don't have to pass the microphone. All right.
Yes, hello everyone, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the Diriyah Biennial Foundation for having me here for this public program and for this panel, and I would really also thank the Goethe Institute in Riyadh for the funding and the support and the organizing of my first 7-8 days trip to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh and to Jeddah. And I would also like to thank, to congratulate Aya and the foundation.
Thank you so much.
Philip and the team and all the participating artists for this really extraordinary first edition of Biennial in Syria, in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this really great surprise and for this great Biennial. Yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit, Rafal, about the Berlin Biennial, maybe something about the background. The Berlin Biennial was founded in 1996 as a private initiative, and we started with the first edition in 1998. We struggled the first 3 editions very much because we had no secure funding, but from the 4th edition on, the federal state, the cultural foundation of the federal state took over most of the funding of the biennial, so we managed to get in the normal rhythm of a 2 years event happening in Berlin, and our aim was always to have the biennial happening, of course, on the level or on the layer of the discussions in Berlin and what is happening in Berlin, but also mirroring the global discourse of the international art scene. So, of course, biennials are dealing with the most contemporary art, and they are inviting artists for new commissions and for reflecting on what is ongoing in the world, what are the discussions, what is the discourse. And art is, of course, a laboratory, a space for imaginations, a space for experiments, and also a space for visioning the future. So therefore, art, of course, and also biennials especially, might have more in social impact and also possibilities for encountering possibilities for social changes than maybe institutions or museums, because museums are following another rule a little bit, and the freedom and the openness of the biennials helps, of course, also to open your eyes and to open your mind as an audience when you are looking at the works. And when it comes to communities and the question of communities, the first community, I think, is the artist scene itself. It's the local artist scene. It's our aim to strengthen the local artist scene and their institutions in the local, but also in the global. It's the artist's production and, of course, the audience. And I guess the audience needs really to understand the language of the artists, and therefore we have to do a lot to address this, to make it possible, and we need really to mediate and also to educate at least part of the audiences, especially also the children when it comes to education, the children and the youth. And therefore we have to develop our tools to enable them also to go for an exchange and an internationality, which is at least the language of the artist, and to know the production behind, and when this is gonna happen, then you can really enter up in a kind of knowledge production also for the audience. Yes, and then it comes, of course, to the question of mediation. It is not done with like only guided tour. I think you have to explain. I think you have to manage via different kind of activities, workshops, whatever else, to approach the audience and to guide them. What we are doing is, indeed, we are putting a focus on the mediation and the education, and I don't know, maybe we can switch to, yeah, this is a work which I would like as maybe one example of a kind of, yeah, social art, if you want this term, by a young artist, or in the time of 2008, as we showed this work in the frame of the 5th Berlin Biennial, a quite young artist, Catharina Shaida, who was and is based in the Czech Republic, and she looked for the post-socialist conditions in her country. And what she did is she moved through her former village, and she could see that people in her village, in her little village, put a lot of, they marked their property, which was not the case in socialist times. So they marked their properties with fences and with blocking the general public, and she looked at it and said, okay, I cannot anymore take my shortcuts, which I used to take to go to school from at home and come back. And she started the whole process of communication, to communicate with her neighbors, to enable her again, and also the other kids and the other people in the village, to take again these shortcuts. So she started a procedure of, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months of communication, asking the neighbors if they could help to put letters on the fences so that they can cross again their properties and use the shortcuts. And of course, this communication act, or this act of communication with the neighbors in the village, helped to open up a little bit more the thoughtful thinking about what is happening with the common property and the single property in post-socialist times. And this is a work which we showed in an outside space of the Berlin Biennial, and she invited also neighbors from there to look at it, to talk at it, and we organized a lot of workshops and asked them also to maybe think about what can be a tool to climb over this fence. So this is only one work, but this is, of course, a work coming from an artistic perspective, and it's an artist who really spent the time for communicate with the neighbors. This is sometimes for biennials difficult in the local context, because then an artist needs to know very, very exactly what are the problems and how can I intervene, and how much time need I to spend to be with the communities I'm working with. Yeah. So this is maybe an example from our last edition, from the 11th Berlin Biennial, and there we tried to open up a space 1 year before we opened the Berlin Biennial. We opened up a project space, a little space in a district in Berlin, which is not that rich and good situated, to undertake the attempt to explain the concept of the Berlin Biennial, the invited artists and their works they are working on a little bit more beforehand, to open up the talk with the community there, and to get them a little bit behind the scenes, to get them understanding how are artists working, what are their aims, what is the idea behind the general concept of the Berlin Biennial in total, because we sometimes use languages which are not very much understandable for most of the audiences. So we are thinking about our own, or we need to think about our own bubble, and to look how we can open it up. So we used this space, opened it up, as I said, 1 year before, for those kind of activities, and also we invited an artist collective who is anyhow working with children, with younger generation, to become part, as artists, to become a participant of the Berlin Biennial, but work with children and with the younger generation. So what they did, they tried to address the themes of the Berlin Biennial in a more playful way, and they worked with a group of children over several weeks in different kinds of workshops, puppet theater, activities. They built their own puppets and invented a play with the puppets about single and social communities and their identities. And this starting point led at the end really that to the fact that the children, even after we had to close the space due to Corona, we managed to open up the Berlin Biennial 2 months later than planned, but the children came back, and the workshop took place, and the workshop then was at least managed to be also in the exhibition space. So these are maybe, and this is led me to the point that we, for example, decided to go also, for example, with this artist couple to cooperate with people or with artists who are anyhow already in this field active, and not only to invent something from our perspective, but to invite the artists to deal with the themes with the groups they are anyhow working with. And this kind of cooperations, I think this is also a very, very important point for a biennial when it comes to discovering or also to broaden the audience. So the Berlin Biennial tries always to cooperate with a project space or a non-profit space in the city, also to help them, to put a light of them and their work, to use their knowledge also, or to take their knowledge with us. And these are maybe some points I would like to mention at that moment, and to try to put an eye on in the further ongoing discussion. I don't know. I think the next.
I think we should continue with Ute, I believe. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, also thanks so much to Aya and the Diriyah Foundation and everybody who made this possible, and also to Will, who put me on Tether, so I could download some slides, because I was already on the way when I heard we can present some slides. So, and I only want to present a few to add to the discussion that we have together. I mean, Gabi mentioned Berlin Biennale. We worked together on the third Berlin Biennial, where I was the artistic director. And actually, Gabi joined the Biennale because there was no infrastructure. So it was a third edition, but only from the third edition onwards, infrastructure was created. And it's very tough for Biennale. It's every 2 years. If you have to build up everything from scratch, all the knowledge has to come back. You have to create the whole system, outreach, press. There is so much work. The curatorial part is just a small portion. And the armada of people working in the biennial, to train them each time, that's a very big effort. So, but what also is important is a Biennale has to find their place in space and time. Yeah, no place is the same, but even I was here I had the pleasure to be here 2.5 years ago when we had a short stop in Riyadh, and then we went to Al Ula and to Jeddah, and the changes just in these 2.5 years, I would say Saudi is no more the same than it was 2.5 years. It is a different place. It is a different time. And I think this is what we also have to see. This morning it was mentioned that biennials are also kind of like seismic. They are seismographs in a moment in time. Museums are very stable. They are there. They don't run away the next day. But a biennial is a short moment in time. And so it's almost if you visit your family like once a year, you see they have changed, their hair has grown, they gained some weight. If you see people every day, you don't see the change. So I think this is why the Biennale sees a place each time differently. And this is, and I think this moment of time is then shared with the public. And so I'm really very curious where this Biennale is going. I just mentioned a few. excuse me, the images are a bit unsharp. I just sucked them down from the internet. I was working in a biennial, which was a trans-border biennial. It really dealt with the situation of the border between Mexico and United States, Tijuana and San Diego in particular, and the tension, the situation at the border, what is the situation for border cities in terms of migration, illegal migration, labor, etc. So this biennial invited artists from all over the world, also local artists, to engage on both sides of the border. And I was asked, and this is actually the wall came from the First Gulf War, actually. So it's the plane, it's the plates that were used to unload the tanks from the ships. So the people in Mexico said, like, we don't even deserve like a Berlin Wall. It's basically the leftover from a war. And so I was asked by the curator, Osvaldo Sanchez, if I can create an archive for the Biennale and for the context when the audience comes to understand the situation. And then I looked up what archives are there, and said there are amazing archives. Some of them accessible, others from the university less accessible, and others are not accessible because they're on both sides of the border. So I said, I think the best thing is we connect those archives. So what we created, we thought we should have a space that is very flexible, that is very accessible, and that was this little trailer. It looked like a taco booth where you usually could buy your tacos. And so we went and connected 13 archives over the period of the biennial and asked them to have for a week open days. So really normal people can access these archives and so we introduced them, we took on material. And it was amazing because when we started this, people brought us boxes with cassettes suddenly and said, like, one man, he interviewed migrants over a long period of time before they left Tijuana because he wanted to hear their stories. And he said, I have this vast archive and I don't know what to do. I give it to you. There were youth programs who would make films, and so they gave us all their, then it was like DVDs. And so we said, what are we doing with this material? We are there only temporary. So we really looked for archives to give this material afterwards. And so rather than having the people coming to us, we actually went to the people over this period of time. I have to say, I shared with Alia this morning because her mom lives in San Diego and La Jolla. I asked for interns, and the only interns I found were Mexicans who live in San Diego. And luckily, my intern, she came with an SUV, and she had an SUV, and she would like then transport this trailer over the next weeks from place A to B. So I was very fortunate. Yeah, here you see like the different places. It was libraries. The Athenaeum has the biggest collection actually of artist books. So that was an archive of local artists, but also international artist books. Then we were at the UCSD, the University of California, San Diego, but we also went to the city archives, and we worked also in informal settlements. And so we really went to very different communities. We also got material from them. So each of them like gave us more material for the archives about festivities they have. Like we learned they created their own local bank because there was no bank for the informal settlements. So it was also kind of a learning space. And I think the Biennale itself learned a lot about their own community. Yeah, education. There are a lot of invisible components of a biennial. Education, I think, is one of them. And it's not just the official education, it's the people. I was today, each time I went somewhere in, people said, can I tell you something about this artwork? So it's the people who are kind of the guardians of the exhibition. That's basically the invigilators. And so I think this is a big group often of young people, people who not usually every day work with art. They suddenly are every day with art and share this art with other people. This is a fast education also about other places, artists that come from elsewhere. So this is not to underestimate what this contributes actually to create a community. As Gabi said, on the one side it is the artists, but it's also the team, and the team usually is several hundred people. If you see what happened here, this is a huge community, and they share in the future. And another important area that's also a bit unsharp is the Guangzhou Biennale that got started in 1993. 1993 was the beginning of many biennales in Asia. And they also started almost from the beginning an international curators course. So they invited usually 23 participants, and 23 because they had a small hotel. They always rented in the summer and had 23 bedrooms. So it was always 23 participants. They were annually invited. They had to pay the flight themselves, but the accommodation, the food, everything then was paid by the Biennale. I was leading one of these courses, and it was very intense. I had 3 sessions with them per day over 1 month, and I think I learned about them more than I did about my own students usually in my program, because them I see once a week for a few hours. And so I also created a bond with them. And when I had a sabbatical the next year, I thought, what do I do with my sabbatical? And I decided to visit all of them, because they came from all over the world. I couldn't visit all of them, but I managed to see 15, including in Melbourne. I was in New Zealand, I was in Australia, I was in Chile, I was in France, and because I really wanted to understand, where do they work usually? What are they doing? What is their community? And then they showed me their art scene. And this with many I worked for a long time, and here in the very front in the middle, Ankaru Chuyu, actually joined me then in Singapore when I built up a new institution, and she is with me there since 9 years. So you create also this kind of bonds in education. Yeah, and then what was also important, these younger curators, they kind of also asked the community, what are they missing? What is not there? And it was for the local artists, they said, yeah, all these international artists are coming in, and all this audience is coming in, but we are not seen. So what is in there for us? So they worked with our young curators in that team, and really we developed something in Day in Market, where many of these artists, it's like a souk, had small studios, etc. And that also some of them continued afterwards to collaborate together. So I think it's also important to create other infrastructures beyond like the big curator with a big C and often a very prominent artist, which is very important to see, but then also to create other formats that are bringing also other generations together. But then also, who is the community? We had in, which year was it, Rafal, when there was the Biennial in Norway. Norway has several biennales, and Bergen wanted to make another biennale, and then the curator who was asked to do that, she said, like, we don't need another biennial, we should rather ask what is a biennale for. And still the politicians wanted to have a biennale, and this is how the Bergen Assembly got started. It's a triennial, and it can be reinvented completely anew each time. And just as an example here, in one of the editions, I was 10 years on that board, so we developed it together with several board members, and we invited Tarek Atoui from Beirut, a composer and musician, and also an artist, to work for 2.5 years. He got all the funding, so we invited 3 conveners, so he got a big amount of funding, and we said, you can do what you want with it. And what he did is he's very interested because also of his upbringing in Beirut during the Civil War and the many bombs that went out. There is a lot of quite a big of a deaf community or hearing impaired community. So what he developed was, over these years, you see here an empty swimming pool, he developed instruments that can be played by deaf people for deaf people. So it was a complete different community that suddenly appeared. But what was amazing, the concert that was at the opening, it was also to create an awareness amongst those who are not hearing impaired to understand what it means to hear, and how do we hear not only with our ears but with the body. And he needed these 2.5 years to really establish this kind of formats, and also there was a deaf conductor, he worked with the school there, with deaf people, so a complete different community got established. So this just to throw in what could be even social change in a community. So thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna now ask Aya. Obviously, we don't have that many images to share, but the exhibition is outside, and I would like Aya to elaborate maybe on also on the things that for us that we won't see when we leave, all the programs that will happening, because there seems to be quite a lot going on.
Thank you, Dr. Rafal. Thank you everyone. So yeah, I mean, we don't have images yet, but we will have a lot hopefully very soon. But all I can say from all the discussions and pillars that we've spoken about is that education is a very, very important kind of pillar that we have in the foundation. Not only from from an exhibition's perspective, where you go in and it's a beautiful and very intellectual exhibition, but also I'm a firm believer in having a parallel, very strong and thorough education program. And this is why the public program team, Raneem, and the AR team have been really, really focusing on doing things kind of, I would say, differently, because we want to do it in a way where you can come and see the exhibition, but you can also come and also ask questions and think and start enjoying the works and enjoying the the topics and everything about it, but also really understand a little bit more the infrastructure of the art world, because it's a vast we're trying to keep up with the rest of the world, and Saudi's being really, really, we're working really hard on making things up to date. Like you said, it's about a space and time. So we all felt like the informal education is a very, very important component in as part of this, and it's something that we want to keep on programming for the rest of the year after even the biennial. So it's really about engaging the community and engaging and really addressing their questions that are always, we take them for granted. We think they're normal. We think they're very obvious answers, but really not really. Even personally, I was working on the strategy of the foundation, and Dr. Rafal was helping us and advising us on a lot of things. And there were some workshops where different people came in and gave us different perspectives on biennials and how they are kind of they play a geolocation role and they play an educational role and this and that, and doing different benchmarks. It really opened our eyes into how things how important it is actually to have education is a very, very big component in this. So the rest of the show will have daily actually public programs. So we'll have talks. We'll have something that I love. It's my favorite thing called art. DB 101s, Diriyah Biennale 101. So it's just about kind of answering questions. I would say like frequently asked questions. So what's a curator's role in a biennial or even an exhibition? It's funny, the Tate actually has this tab on their website where they do all these like art terminologies for different people attending or just visiting the website, and it's all about like explaining what site-specific works are, what the role of a curator is, and sometimes especially with a growing infrastructure now, it's important that we address these things and even kind of just make them a little bit more engaged with our audience and answer their questions. Maybe one person will come back and ask another question. Maybe we want to be a safe haven for people to come back and really inquire and even if we're not going to be able to always provide the workshops that they want, but we can maybe help them out. Even when it's artists, we want to be able to help artists apply for their grants or write their concepts properly, or maybe team them with curators that can help them research properly or grow or send them to residencies. We want to be able to really be part of that community and grow it. And I know that it's not a very conventional approach, but it's something that I feel like we really need as a society and to really be able to engage with the community from an educational perspective. So that's why it's not really called an educational program as much as it's called a public program. It's really about engaging with the public in different forms and for different age groups. So it's not only for children or for artists only, but it's also for young couples. I always encounter my friends who are like, we want to start collecting. How do we start collecting? Is there a trend we follow? And I'm like, no, actually, you can start somewhere, and then you can, start growing a collection, or you can, learn a little bit more about, a specific artist that you like, follow them, maybe fund a few things, These are things that you're only told when you ask, and we want to always be the platform where people can come in and ask questions. So this is something that's like, I think, a value or a core value that we have, and I hope that we can actually keep it and have it throughout all our future exhibitions as well. So yeah.
So since we're talking about audience engagement, I would like to, like I said earlier, just engage the audience as much as possible today. I don't know if there are any questions for any of our speakers, please. Do we have a microphone?
Hello to everybody. It's a very nice subject, very nice talks. All the speakers, they were wonderful. I noticed you talk about Nicosia, and you talk through the second your name, please? Gabriele. Yeah, you talk about, I saw from the pictures there's some immigrant, and you talk about also immigrant in Mexico. This is very interesting. We noticed politicians, they didn't do a good job about the whole world. Do you think artists, by engaging in cooperative Biennale, can make a big difference and resolve a lot of problems in the world? That's my question for you.
I mean, the expectation towards the artist and the art, that the art is going to change the world, I guess this is a very difficult situation. But art and artist production and artists, they can open the eyes, and they can, as I said in the beginning, they can open the mind, and they can maybe turn your thoughts in another direction and can open you another perspective. And this is something which is really crucial for the future. Yeah, I mean, to be able to imagine and/or to have imaginations for the future, and even if it's experimental or even if it's only a first thought, to talk about that, to make it visible, to create a platform for a discourse, for a discussion, and for an exchange. Yeah. I think that we can really manage. And that is exactly the question, what you mentioned, Aya, and of course Ute, you as well, to make a biennial as accessible as possible for everyone, for everybody, independently, the age, the community, the group, to whom you feel you are belonging to. And not only accessible, but also inclusive. And therefore it's so important, what you said, Aya, that really the people can come, the visitors can come, or even if it's not a visitor, yeah, if it's a starting point to be engaged with what you can see here or what is possible in the field of contemporary art, that you can ask the questions and that you feel welcome to ask the question. And for us, I have to say, and I think that's the good thing, having a foundation, a kind of infrastructure in between. For us, it's always the question, as the Berlin Biennial, for example, how we can take what we made possible with the last edition towards the next edition, because we always have the 3-month biennial up with a lot of activities during the running period, and of course also before, when it comes to the team, to the infrastructure, to the whole preparations and the communication with the artists, and then we have the at least evaluation a little bit, and then we have a new curator or a new curatorial team, and we are starting the next biennial. So what we need is, we need to bridge and to take this audience, which we gained with the last edition. We need to be at least, we need to invent a kind of continuity, yeah, to take them with us, because who came for this Berlin Biennial, Berlin Biennial or Diriyah Biennial will come next time again, and that you have really, with all your hospitality and with all your possibilities, you have to take this moment.
Yeah, I think also if you have different communities, I think it's very important. I saw this in Kochi in South India, which is maybe not an unlikely place to start a biennale. I mean, they're I'm very, say like Indians are very discursive, and so that's not the point, but like who is invited. And they made the Biennale also free of charge, and they opened the doors, and so many families with kids came. It's the first time they see art, and so, you know, there's a lot of questions. So it's not like a museum where you think, oh, I need some education, or maybe that's not for me. And then if you have art and projects from the different communities, if you, as we see with Tarek Atoui, who addressed deaf people, like who do we address as a community? If this is part of a biennial, the people also feel invited. That is also for me, I find myself in this context. And then, as Gabi said, what will be very important, and I think that will be very curious also for here, is what can you do between the biennales? What can you do in the years? I know next year is the Islam Biennale, and so there will be activities going on, but what can you do throughout the year in order to allow the community not to fade away, you know, that they feel there is a place for them. The Biennale becomes a destination.
I would maybe just add that I think it's difficult to sort of answer that in you know, with yes or no, or we really have to look at variety of different biennales, you know, and at the specific project that we're talking about. So I think sometimes the Biennale can enable artists to do amazing things and to create a substantial impact. But there are many cases, like for example, the Venice Biennale, that is very famous, but each time an artist tries to kind of push really with a project, it creates some sort of catastrophe one way or another. So it's about the context really of the project and how the project is specific to the location and the host city or host neighborhood or host community. So I think it really can be, I really believe, you know, Biennale can be a great platform for that. But I wouldn't assume that all biennales are, and for all projects.
I just want to say that being Saudi, I thought one of the biggest challenges we have in our community is really allowing the Biennale to reach out to different parts of Saudi Arabia. Having come from the Eastern Province, I felt we don't want Riyadh to be considered to be the place only, or Jeddah. It's always been from Jeddah and from Riyadh. And it's how can the Biennale be relevant to the entire Saudi Arabia, you know, people from the north, from the south, and to reach out, as you said, Dr. Bauer, to the communities all over. And I think language is a problem, because here we are, we're talking in English, but there are a lot of Saudis who cannot really follow. And I hope we take that into account. There's some way that they can
We have translation.
tune in.
We do have translation.
But I mean, for the common person, so it doesn't become so exclusive. Sure. And that's what we very often have with the concept of a Biennale, that it's for those who are in the art community,
Exactly.
but to reach out to everybody in Saudi. So it's relevant to the farmer who's in the Eastern Province or Riyadh, and as well as, you know, a laborer who, you know, can see what the relevance is. And I think here you say education, and I think really it has to start like a year ahead of time, with the Ministry of Culture maybe engaging, you know, the media, the schools 1 year ahead to see, because it'll open up so many opportunities for young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I think what you mentioned, it's totally right, and this is something we have also to talk about with the curators, for example. So this is why about the language, yeah. This is why we, for example, Ute mentioned the curators workshop of the Guangzhou Biennial. The Berlin Biennial also has a curators workshop which happened every 2 years since the 4th edition in 2006. And the theme and the topic and the issue for the next curators workshop in 2022 is the curatorial language. How are we approaching our audience, and where do we have to be more simple and easy? Because we are like sometimes circling with terms which are so overloaded, and it could be much more easier to approach our audience with the questions we are raising in the biennials, or with the issues we are dealing with in the biennial. This is one point, and I think a biennial can shine. A biennial can through the shiny points in all directions of a country. It's maybe not possible only with the own infrastructure, but therefore for us, for example, it's so important also to cooperate with schools, with other initiatives, not only in Berlin with the university, for example, or the Academy of Fine Art for the training of the mediators, for example. Yeah, so you can build those bridges. You have to go step by step and try to find your possibilities.
But I think what you said, it is very crucial. In Guangzhou, for example, the condition was that there is always a certain number of Korean, South Korean young curators who are involved. First of all, they speak the language, they help the others to understand the country better. So there is an exchange between those participants. And they go back in their places. So I think it's also it's very difficult for a biennial. They already try to create an audience here, and so it takes time. But I think if there is the recognition that this is required to be accessible to different groups, and I think this is something very important. What is also crucial is if you work with the ministries, to really say it would be important to create, for example, visits for students and school kids from different parts of the country to come, to sponsor buses. To do this, I mean, the Sao Paulo Biennale does a great job. They also, when Lula da Silva was president, as a gift to the Biennale, he made the Biennale for free. So, because many people cannot afford the entrance, usually for a biennial, and he supported school buses. So I think there are different possibilities of reaching out. I mean, the distances here are big, so with a bus you don't go maybe very far, but it's a beginning, and I think you slowly really can develop this extension.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we're doing the same thing. Where our registration is for free, and we're providing school buses. Where some of our sponsors have helped out as well. So we want to make it super accessible and super easy to come and just attend and enjoy the show. And yeah. Thank you.
I realize that we're slowly running out of time. Do we have time for one more question? No. Okay. So I would like to just maybe wrap up also to continue on what you said, that I've seen biennials really acting as fertilizers around the world for local art scene, for the infrastructure. We've seen it in Berlin. We've seen it in Istanbul, where biennial starts, there is just nothing. It's a desert. 20 years later, it's one of the most important art centers in the world. So, warning for Aya, there may be another biennial in Saudi opening soon. There may be a lot of other institutions that in 20 years, the conversation that we have now may be actually quite irrelevant, because that will not be a problem. So I would just encourage everybody to think large, and yeah, everybody can start their own biennial. Thank you so much.